We've got more than 60 folks on, and it's a few minutes after 7. Okay. Dawn just put up the housekeeping reminders, and I would like to start by welcoming everyone, Wild One St. Louis chapter members, to our 2022 speaker series. I'm Marcia Gebhardt, the chapter president, for those of you I haven't met yet. And this is our 4th year of our popular winter speaker series, which we do every January, February, and March. You can view the January presentation, Making Whoopee in the Garden by Erin Goss, if you haven't already, by going to our YouTube channel, St. Louis Wild Ones, and it'll be up for, I believe, another week or 2. Hopefully, this is the last year that we will be doing virtual only for these speaker series presentations. I think our goal is that next year we would be able to be in person again, but then also be able to share the recordings for those who aren't able to attend in person. So tonight, stay tuned after tonight's presentation and our Q&A at the end of it for a preview of our 2022 programming. That'll include our chapter's members-only garden gatherings, the very exciting upcoming Partners for Native Landscaping workshop lineup, and our annual St. Louis Native Plant Garden Tour. More about that on the other side of the presentation. Y'all saw the housekeeping reminders about video and off and audio muted. And of course, as we've all learned how to operate these things over the past year or 2, you know that you can, throughout the presentation, send questions to the chat, and we will share those during a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And then again, like in January, a recording will be available of tonight's presentation on our YouTube channel for 30 days. So my honest pleasure, I mean, I always say and always mean it's my pleasure to introduce whomever, but it really is sort of a special pleasure to introduce Ann Early and Bob Seamer. How many people do that? I can't believe it. I have never said that before, Bob.
You just edit that Martha.
Out. Okay, thanks. Bob laughing is a good indicator of one of the pleasures of working with Ann and Bob, and that is their sense of humor. So I appreciate your laughter, Bob. Anyway, they are both longtime partners in their volunteer work together and in their life. They have been active for the past 20 years in 2 particular local nature organizations, St. Louis Wild Ones being a primary one. And we're always so happy to see them at our monthly events because not only the sense of humor that I just mentioned, but their energy and enthusiasm. They are on our Speakers Bureau page, which you can access on our resources tab, keeping in mind our Speakers Bureau for, you know, any of your local or other organizations that you might want speakers for. They've been for, gosh, I don't know how many years, doing a very popular Wild for Monarchs presentation, which I bet a number of you have heard. And then more recently, they're the topic that you will hear them present tonight. They've also been, for the last 20 years, very active with the Missouri Native Plant Society. And then in their volunteer capacities, they have also worked with, get ready for a list, Missouri Master Naturalists, Missouri Prairie Foundation, Grow Native, Missouri Bluebird Society, Shaw Nature Reserve, Missouri Botanical Garden, and the Butterfly House. And then through these years, their work has earned them a number of volunteer recognition awards from the Missouri Bluebird Society, the Missouri Native Plant Society, and maybe most impressive, the Missouri Prairie Foundation in 2018 gave them the statewide Prairie Volunteers of the Year Award, Donald M. Christensen Prairie Volunteers of the Year Award. So congratulations to them. It's just an indicator of how knowledgeable and long-term impressive their work has been. And so now it's our treat to hear Anne and Bob talk to us about woodland wildflowers from winter to mid-May. And I can't think of anything I would rather think about and learn more about today than woodland wildflowers, winter to mid-May. Please tell us and show us, Anne and Bob.
Thank you very much, Marcia, for that introduction. And we want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. And Bob is starting to share his screen here and queuing up our slides. This presentation tonight is about looking at spring wildflowers in their natural habitats. And a lot of these spring wildflowers are only in bloom for a very short period of time. They're here and then they're gone. And they're easy to miss because if you aren't looking at them when they're blooming, you may miss the bloom time on them, or you may not see them because they're sort of inconspicuous.
Hey, Anne, I accidentally muted you, but I think you're good now.
Okay, thank you. But the short bloom time of these plants is why they are known as spring ephemerals. And that means they're not around for very long. Now you're thinking, well, if these flowers are such short-lived, what good are they? And why are they important? Well, they're very important for the early spring pollinators, tiny flies and bees that really need some flowers in the early spring when there may not be a lot of floral resources around.
Yeah, can you hold on for a second, Bob? If Anne's talking, can you mute yourself? Because we're getting an echo. But then you got to remember, if you want to say something, to say it loud or unmute.
I will mute myself until I'm on, or can you mute me here?
Perfect.
So these spring ephemerals, as I said, are quite short-lived, but they are important for the early spring pollinators. And then as spring goes on, they're also important because they're used by butterflies and hummingbirds. Some of these plants are also quite important in our history and culture. And over the years, some of them have been used for various purposes, including for food and for medicine. As we go along on our walk through the woods virtually, you will notice that there is a lot of diversity in these spring wildflowers. There are all different kinds of colors, shapes, and forms to these plants. And that's probably my favorite thing about them. I think it makes them really interesting and fun. And after a long, cold, dreary winter, it's great to see these spring bloomers. And it's kind of like seeing an old friend again. They always make me smile. So the pictures that we are going to share with you tonight were not taken by us. They were taken by Jack Harris and Pat Harris, who were very accomplished and knowledgeable amateur botanists and naturalists in the St. Louis area for many years. Several. Okay, we're having a technical situation here.
You're good now. You're good now. You were good for a minute there, and you were temporarily muted.
Okay, I think Bob is hung up on advancing the slides, but I'll just keep talking a little bit. So Jack and Pat Harris gave us permission years ago to use these photos to continue the work that they started in making people more aware of the native wildflowers and plants that we have in our area, and not just making them aware of them, but in helping them to appreciate these plants as well. So we hope that by sharing this presentation with you tonight, you will enhance your appreciation of these plants and maybe learn a few things that you didn't know before as well. These pictures were taken at various places around the St. Louis area, many local and state parks, as well as conservation areas. So these photos were all taken at places around the St. Louis region. So with that, I will turn it over to Bob, and he is going to get us started on our virtual walk through the woods by talking about, oh no, winter.
Bob, you are still muted.
Well, hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. One of the things with the Zoom is that it allows us to reach a lot of people. And last weekend, and I were tuned in to one of the presentations by Ohio State University on pollinators and bees. And the moderator announced that they were going to have to restrict their registration to 10,000 people. And when I signed the contract with Marcia and Don, we made a stipulation that we would beat that. And we have, because Dawn has restricted it to 12,000 registrants. Anyway, what we're going to do is kind of like think about being invited to a party. And it's a great party. I mean, they have all the food you can eat, great drink, music, a lot of interesting people, but you don't know a single person. Well, you're not going to have a whole lot of fun at that party. But you change it just a little bit and find that there are some good friends of yours there and a lot of acquaintances and a few people you don't know. Well, as a matter of fact, Mother Nature is giving a party. She's going to start in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be a great party. And you are invited. So our intention is to give you a little heads up on who's going to be there. And I think you're going to find some old friends and some old acquaintances and maybe a few new people. And so we're just going to casually walk through here. Now, if you take a look at the woods here, the first question you might ask is, why a woods? Well, the answer is that's where the ephemerals come out in the spring. You see, they need sunlight, and they need it in order to produce the food that is going to supply them and eventually all the animals on the earth. And the only time they can really get good direct sunlight is in the spring before the trees leaf out. So that's their time to flower, to reproduce, to really shine. And so that's why we're going to spend our time in the woods. You can see this is a typical Missouri woodland, a little overcrowded, a little snow on it, unlike last week when they had a lot. And hello, come on, you goofy thing. My keys are not working very well again. I don't know what it happens, but this is not going to be much of a presentation if we can't get through the hello, hello. Dawn, if you're there and you know another way to make these keys go forward, I would appreciate it. Ah, try this. There we go. And
Yeah.
seeing here, one of the things that you might run across in the woods is that a number of the trees have a leaf still on them. And this is a situation called marcescence, and it occurs mostly on oak trees, and you'll see it quite a bit. There's nothing wrong with the tree, it's just a situation to observe. And here is a little bit later in the season. You can see the snow has melted and it looks a lot warmer. But there are still a lot of green out there, even though not many of the plants are actually blooming, a lot of them are still alive. And here's an example of it, a wild sweet William. Here's a little Jacob's ladder poking its nose up out between the leaves. Here's a big bunch of ferns and mosses, which remain green throughout most of the winter. And here's some fiddleheads coming up. By the way, does everybody know that fiddleheads are edible? And here's a little ebony spleenwort, one of the fern allies. And this is an interesting one, the walking fern. And this is one that you'll see a lot all winter long. These are actually the leaves of the Adam and Eve orchid. And they have a strange way of behaving. They turn green in the fall and stay green all winter. And then in the spring, they die off and the actual spot of the plant itself comes up and blooms. So you only see these in the winter, not in the summer or the spring when the plant is actually blooming. Now, before I mention one of the plants that actually starts blooming this time of year, I should make a remark about the naming. Now, most of you know that common names for plants are kind of a mess. A lot of plants have multiple common names, and unfortunately, sometimes several different plants have the same common name. Now, this is not too much of a problem and just a friendly, gee, that's a plant I know type atmosphere. But if you get into a situation where you really need to know the plant, let's say, for example, you wanted to plant bee balm in a wooded garden. Well, you'd want to use the woodland version, the version we're going to see today, Monarda Bradburyina. But you might inadvertently plant the summer version, Monarda fistulosa. And if you did, you would probably have very poor results. So at that point, it really becomes important to know the actual correct scientific name of the plant that you're looking for. Anyway, with that behind us, let's take a look at the first plant that is really going to be blooming this year. In fact, it's probably already blooming, though I haven't been out to see it. And that is witch hazel. And you can see that it really has an attractive bloom. They're not all that large. And something that you might not be able to tell from here, I doubt if you will, and that is it really has an outstanding smell. And while this is the first plant to bloom normally, and it will normally come out in January or early February. And there is a cousin to it, Hamamelis virginiana, which is actually a fall blooming version of this. And it is the last plant to bloom, or one of the last plants to bloom in the fall. It'll bloom in November. So the witch hazels end the year and then come back and start the year for us. If you want to see these, a good place is down at the best. Look at the signs. Here's another one that comes out in the winter. This is the hazelnut, and these are the male flowers or catkins. Oh, great. I'm having internet problems here again for a second. It just told me I am unstable. I think it meant my internet, but that could be me also. Hello. I don't know what it's doing, but the process I was using to step through this is now locked up. And the only thing I know is to wait a minute and see if it doesn't unlock. You know, one thing about computers I have found is that you can never get enough memory on the things. This is a relatively new computer, and I doubled the memory from my last one. And I think Microsoft goes out there and doubles the memory of their operating system every time they issue one. Oh, something's happening. Here we go. Here is the male and female flowers of the hazelnut. And you can see the, as with humans, the female flowers are a lot more attractive. And here is a close-up of the female flower. They're not real big, but if you look for them, you can find them. And there's another close-up of them. Here's what the hazelnut's going to look like in the fall, or at least the late spring, when it actually forms the nut and begins to ripen. Another flower that you might not notice, but comes out very early in the spring, is the red maple. And you can see here, it also has separate male and female flowers. And they are pretty much noticeable. And you can see the fruits are samoras, I believe they're called, over on the right-hand corner. This is one of my favorite flowers. It's the Heartbringer of Spring. And those of you who grew up on Denison, Wildflowers of Missouri, as I did, know that this is the first flower in the book. And when I started out on this, I used to go on the wildflower walks on Thursday. And one of my mentors was Jack Harris. And I asked Jack, I said, Jack, when are we going to get to see a Heartbringer of Spring? Because I've never seen one. And he said, well, we're going to Robertsville State Park next week, and you'll see a bunch of them there. So we got to the park, and I'm looking around, and I don't see them anywhere. So Jack was there, and I said, Jack, where in the heck are these Heartbringers of Spring? And he looks at me and he says, you're standing on them. Well, it turns out that I was. In fact, they were all over the ground. And the problem for me was, if you take a look at these pictures, this one is very similar to the picture in Denison. Now, how tall is that plant? In looking at it here and in looking at it in Denison, you'd swear that's at least 6 to 8 inches tall and maybe even a foot. Well, it turns out that the silly things are only about 2 to 3 inches tall. And I kept looking around for this thing sticking up out of the ground, and all I really had to do was look down. So that's a lesson for all of you in looking at pictures and books to get your perspective straight. Now, here is a picture of the, again, the Heartbringer of Spring, and our next flower we're going to look at, the bloodroot. And it is probably the most ephemeral of the ephemeral spring flowers. The flowering only lasts a couple of days. And here you can see that when they do flower, particularly as they are frequently against a dark background, they really stand out. And there's a but they have varying numbers of petals. This is a very full one. And even after the flowers have left, though, you can often find where they were because the leaf structure is very unique and very identifiable. And in addition here, we have a seed capsule. And with deference to James Traeger, I will mention something about the seed capsule, which will apply to several other plants we're talking here. That seed capsule is coated with a what is delicious to ants, coating. And the ants find these seed capsules and drag them off. You can imagine a little ant carrying that giant capsule to their dens where they eat it and feed it to their larvae. And when they have eaten all of the outer coating, they take the remains, which is the actual seed, to their garbage dump. Well, the way it works out, ant garbage dumps are perfect places for seeds to germinate. And so that way, the ants play a very important part in propagating this and several other of the spring ephemerals. Here's one that you'll see quite a bit. It's the trout lily. And actually, sometimes it's called the dog-tooth violet. But why it's called, I have no idea. Here you can see it being pollinated by a bunch of beetles. And here's a second version of a second species. We have white ones and yellow ones. And before I leave that, I should mention that you'll often see them in the woods. You'll see vast patches of these trout lilies that are all the leaves. And amongst the leaves, there may be hundreds of them. You may only see 4 or 5 of them that are actually in bloom. But that's the way they seem to work. And so when you see them in the field, look for these great patches of them and look around for the ones that are blooming. Here we have the sharp lobe hepatica. And one of the things about it is that the leaf remains a bright red over winter. So instead of turning brown and falling off, it stays there. It makes them easy to find. And then in the spring, new leaves emerge that are, of course, green. And here you can see the actual flower. And here are some white ones. And here are some purple ones. And while some of them have been given variation names, they are the same species. And you will frequently see many of these spring flowers that come in slightly different colors. Those trout lilies that had different species with different colors were kind of the exception. And here is an example of a dark purple one and a lavender one, and they both seem to be coming off of the same plant. And there's a really light colored pink one. Now, one of the flowering plants that are really indicative of spring is the flowering shrubs and trees. And the first one really to come out, and most of these early ones you will see, the flower comes out before the leaves. And so they really make a stark contrast, and it's easy to see them. And one of the first ones is the serviceberry. And this is one of the ones that has many names. In the East, it's called the shadbush. And sometimes around here, it's called the pop tree because you can see the flower close up, kind of looks like a piece of popcorn. Now, in the East, they get the name shadberry because they bloom when the shad are beginning to run. And it's an indication for the people to go out and fish for shad because they're starting to move and they're easier to catch. Here, they're frequently called serviceberry. because in the hard frozen ground around here, when people would die in the winter, they could not bury them because the ground was too hard to dig graves. So they would store them either, say, in a woodshed or a smokehouse over the winter. And then when the service berry would bloom, they knew that it was soft enough that they could go out and dig graves and conduct the burial service. So that's how they got the name service berry. Here's another close-up of the flower. Now, another very pretty little tree is the wild plum, and it blooms shortly after the start of the serviceberry. Generally, you'll see them overlapping, and from a distance, one can be mistaken for another. But when you walk up close, you'll see that the flowers are quite a bit different. Now, there are actually two species that are around here, Prunus americana and Prunus mexicana. And even though James Traeger took a half an hour one time to try to explain how to tell the difference, I never did get it. Sorry about that, James. One of your favorites, I'm sure you all know this one, is the redbud. And it is almost always, strangely enough, there is a aberration of this that is a white redbud. And they have some of these out at the nature reserve, and they are around someplace. Some of the vendors have developed them, and you can buy them. I think the red ones are prettier. You can see the flowers here. An important thing to know about them is these flowers are edible, and they have a kind of a tiny sweet taste to them. And you can either eat them directly, which I do periodically, or you can put them on salads. Here is a composite showing the red buds overlapping with the blooming of the flowering dogwood. Many years they do overlap, some years they don't. What chart causes the differences, I do not know. But here is the flowering dogwood, and you can see it in winter, and you can see how large the flowering buds have gotten. And here is one in the sun that is blooming really vigorously. There are a couple of these out by the trail house at the nature reserve that really get loaded with flowers, but essentially they are understory trees. Here is a close-up of the flower, and here's a little bit more what they're going to look like in their typical understory environment. You can go out and look into the dark woods before they really start to leaf out and see the dogwoods from a long way out. Now here's another close-up of the flower of the dogwood. And I should point out that these big white, quote, petals are not really petals at all. They're actually bracts. The flower is this yellow part in the middle, or flowers actually. And so the dogwood gets a lot of attention, not because of its beautiful flowers, but because of its beautiful bracts. Okay, Anne, if you take a shot at this.
Sure. Well, let's go back down to the woodland floor and stop looking up for a few minutes, and we'll look at this little toothwort plant, which is quite interesting and gets its name from a couple of physical characteristics of this toothwort. If you look at the leaves on this little plant, you'll see that there are 3 leaflets, and look at the margins. They're all toothed. So that probably is one reason it's named toothwort. The other reason could be that it has an underground rhizome that has pointed projections on it that some people consider to be tooth-like. Anyway, that's probably how it got its name, but we can enjoy the little dainty 4 petals on the flowers of the toothwort. This is a picture of a carpet of spring beauties. And spring beauties are tiny little flowers. When there are a whole bunch of them together, they can make it look like it's almost snowed or something. That picture was taken at Washington State Park, but you can see similar scenes of spring beauties in the springtime at Forest Park and other places as well. Now, these little spring beauties have 5 white or pink petals on them, And you'll notice that these petals are lined with dark pink veins. And that is thought to help guide insects to the nectar in these spring beauty flowers. Here's a little better picture of the pink markings on the petals. And the leaves of this plant are very small. It's just a simple pair of linear kind of grass-like leaves. And the flowers do close up at night and in cloudy or cold weather. But the seed capsules on these spring beauty plants, when they open, the seeds can often be distributed as far as 2 feet from the little plant. So that's how they get to be in these large carpets, and they're really quite attractive and also quite valuable to the early spring pollinators. The bees like these little spring beauty plants quite a bit. Moving on, here's another delicate little flower, the rue anemone. And this is actually one of the longest flowering of our spring ephemerals, which in the scheme of things doesn't say a whole lot. But this little anemone is often found on wooded slopes, and it's usually not found in a big mass of flowers. And it is one of the ones that you can find on mainly upland areas. And the flowers of this one can be white, or they can be pink sometimes too as well. Now, just to confuse things, there's another close-up of the rue anemone. There's another flower called the false rue anemone, and this can be told apart from the regular rue anemone in a couple of different ways. First of all, the flowers on this one are white. If they're pink or white, they can be the other one, but these are always white. And these are, as this photo shows, tend to be in a clump or mass, whereas the regular rue anemone we looked at earlier is a little bit more solitary. And the habitat is also different. The false rue prefers moist bottomlands. So if you see this plant and it's near a creek bed or something like that, you know you probably got the false rue versus the rue anemone, which is more of an upland species. Here's a close-up look at the false rue flowers. And then we have the little violet wood sorrel, which is a delicate little flower. And take a look at the leaves on that. They look like shamrocks, and that is a characteristic of oxalis. But you'll often find these around. They're pretty common. You might even have some in your yard. And there's a close-up look at the flower. Bellwort is a quite distinctive spring wildflower. It's pretty easy to identify this one when it's in bloom. And this is in the lily family. And the name of this, the genus Uvularia, gets its name, it's thought, because Linnaeus chose this genus name for the bellwort because he felt that the drooping flowers reminded him of the uvula in the back of the human throat. So that's the bellwort. And here is the rose verbena. And this is a low spreading plant. The flowers on this one can be either a pink color or more of a purple color, depending on the soil and environmental conditions. There's another picture of the rose verbena, slightly different color on that flower. Well, let's look up again and take another look at some of our spring shrubs, like the spice bush. This is one where the flowers come out before the leaves, and these flowers are kind of inconspicuous, so you might miss these as you're hiking through the woods. But the spice bush is an early spring bloomer, and this is the host plant for the spice bush swallowtail butterfly. And sassafras is another one that's kind of similar, has sort of small, inconspicuous flowers. It is also used as a host plant. There's a close-up of how small these little flowers are. And another one that is an early bloomer of our native shrubs that is a little closer to the ground, has very tiny flowers, and this is the fragrant or aromatic sumac. These are very small flowers, and this blooms quite early and then forms berries that turn red in about May or June, and the birds really like those berries. Here we have a picture of Dutchman's breeches, and this is an easy wildflower to identify. So this one's very interesting. And you sometimes find it in big patches like this. But take a close-up look at the leaves on this plant. You see how the flower gets its name here, obviously, but take a look at those leaves. They're kind of feathery and very finely cut. I think they're really interesting and really pretty. Now, the Dutchman's breeches is pollinated by bees. And this is another where the seeds are dispersed by ants. That's a nice close-up of a beautiful plant of the Dutchman's breeches growing in the woods. And there is a similar species to this, and it is called squirrel corn. So here we have a side-by-side comparison. And you can see there on the left, the Dutchman's breeches spurs are a little more pointed at the top, and they're apart, they're more separated, compared to the picture on the right of the squirrel corn, where the spurs are more rounded and they're closer together at the top. So that's how you can tell the difference, because the foliage is quite similar. And here's a picture of the foliage. And there's a close-up photo of the squirrel corn. I believe someone asked about where the pictures were taken of the Dutchman's. And I think according to the Harris's notes, that particular photo was taken on a private property in St. Charles County. And it says it's no longer there because the property has been developed, which is unfortunately a lot of what happens with these wildflowers, as you know. Pale corydalus is a very small, close to the ground flower, and in moist areas it can form kind of dense mats of yellow color. Now, corydalus in Greek means crested lark. So here's a close-up of the flower. And I will let you decide if you think this looks like a crested lark. Now, what would it be to walk through the woods and not see this invasive species? I know, I can hear you all groaning out there, even though I don't have the audio on. But the good news is that we do have another honeysuckle that we can enjoy, and that is our native honeysuckle, which looks like this when it's in bloom. This is a very attractive yellow honeysuckle. Now, this is one of those flowers that the hummers really enjoy when they come back up north from their winter getaway. Here's a closer look at the yellow honeysuckle, and most of these in the wild would be down in the south central part of the state in the Ozarks, so they aren't as common around this part of Missouri. But we wanted to show them to you because they really are pretty. Much better than the bush honeysuckle that we all see too much of. Now, we do have a lot of violets in this part of the state, and we're just going to show you some different pictures of all the different kinds that are out there. And there's a great variation in the coloration of these flowers. And you'll notice this as we go along, different shades of color. Some are more white than others. And we have this yellow violet that is really pretty and sometimes found in moist woods. All of the violets like these are host plants for the fritillary butterfly. And this is another one of the types of spring wildflowers where ants really enter into the picture. Researchers found that violet seeds that have been manipulated by ants germinate faster and result in healthier plants. There's our common blue violet. And here's the cleft violet. And if you look up in the center of the picture a little bit to the right, you'll see that the leaf there has a cleft in it, and that is how this one gets its name. Now, this doesn't really look much like a violet compared to the other pictures, but this plant is called green violet. And this plant is much taller than our typical violets. Some of these can get up to 2 feet tall. And the little tiny flowers that you see along the stem of this plant are the flowers. So they're very inconspicuous. Here's a little closer view. Don't really look like regular violets at all, but you can see this in the woods, and they are kind of fun to come across. This Hispan buttercup is a very attractive plant. You usually find this in moist habitats. The ranunculus, a name for this one, translated a little frog. And perhaps it got that name because it's found in a wet habitat area, or there is some speculation that the small seed cases of this plant resemble a little frog. I don't know. Either way, it's pretty and a nice plant to come across in the woods. Wild ginger is another one that you may see, and this is often found in colonies in the woods. It's used as a ground cover sometimes. The plant has these very broad heart-shaped leaves that you see here on hairy stems. And then if you dig down in the leaf litter, you may find the flower, which is this 3-lobed brownish color. These are very interesting plants to find. And this is another one of those where ants collect and disperse the seeds. Here's a close-up of that flower. Not real noticeable and not real showy compared to some of the other spring ephemerals. And along that line, we'll go back to looking up and see the pawpaw. This is the flower of the pawpaw. The flowers are out before the leaves on this native understory tree that we have. And you often find colonies of these in moist woods along streams. Here's a closer look at the flowers. And the flower attracts insects to it by both its color and its smell. The pawpaw is used as a host plant by the zebra swallowtail butterfly. There's a closer look at these flowers. They're not very big and they're pretty inconspicuous, so it's easy to miss these. And this is the Ohio Buckeye, another one of our native understory trees. This one is a little different because the leaves are visible before the flowers. And this is how the flower on this looks, this kind of greenish yellow spike. The leaves on the Buckeye are palmate. They're kind of like your hand with the fingers spread out. And this is another one of those plants that the hummingbirds like when they're returning to our area in the springtime. This is how the flowers look when the Buckeye, the Ohio Buckeye, is in bloom. This is a group shot of several wildflowers. You'll see the white Dutchman's breeches we talked about earlier, the yellow Bellwort, and then there are 2 others in this photo, the purple Trillium and the wild Sweet William. and Bob will talk to you about those.
Well, if there is one wildflower perhaps that I associate with spring, it is the purple trillium, sometimes called the wake robin. And you can see there's one here that didn't turn purple. But you don't see them very often in the gardens because they are not typically produced in the trade. The one thing I can absolutely guarantee you about these are they are one of the absolute favorite foods of the deer. We managed to get a couple of them growing in the ground behind our condo, and the first couple of years they just were devastated. We finally got wire mesh over them, and I have to keep repositioning it every year as they begin to grow. But if I don't, the deer will take them out immediately. So if you have any idea of planting them, take care. Here they are with wild sweet William. This is another one of those plants, the wild sweet William, that you need. Whoops, before we go to that, we'll take a look at the white Trillium. You'll notice the extended stem on the flower head. I don't see a lot of these, but if you go over to Engelman Woods, they have a really nice bunch of those over there. And here's a look at the flower and the bracts. You'll notice they're in threes, which is always an indication that they are monocots and usually part of the lily family. Here is our wild sweet William. And this is one of those where you're going to want to make sure you get correct name on it, the scientific name, because the Phlox divaricata is a woodland plant that comes in the lavender color and does well in the shaded areas of the woodland. It has a cousin, Phlox pilosus, that looks a lot the same, except it generally has pink flowers, occasionally purple. It likes a lot more sun and does well out in the sun, but won't do very well in the woodland. Here's a close look at that Phlox divaricata, and they show up all over. I really like seeing these in the spring. Now, here is one that everybody has to like, and that is bluebells. I don't know exactly where this was taken, but if I had to make a guess, it would be down in by the Merrimack River at the Shaw Nature Reserve, where I know there's a several acre plot of these things. You can see how they spread and take over. It's one of the most successful flowers that Ann and I have planted in our backyard. And while they are called bluebells, like everything else we've seen today, they have to sneak in a couple of different colors. The white ones show up, and the bluebells themselves generally come out with pink flowers, and after they open up, they turn blue. But they are very, very pretty. One of the things that we frequently plant with bluebells is the celandine poppies, because the lavender color of the bluebells and the yellow of the celandine poppy really makes a nice contrast. And here are some celandine poppies on their own. Again, there are beaucoup of these over at the nature reserve, but you'll find them most woods. See how pretty that is when it's isolated like that? Here's one that we saw a little bit earlier coming out in the winter with its, I said, poking its head out of the leaves. This is Jacob's Ladder, and it has a very delicate and complex looking lavender looking flower on it. Whoops. And here you can see it close up, the screwy arrangement of the anthers there. Ah, the blue-eyed Mary. Sometimes you mistake this for a violet, but it's not. You can see the leaves are entirely different. And of course, that is a Dutchman's breeches leaf in the front. That's not the blue-eyed Mary. But you can see the leaves here are not at all violet-like. And the flower is really, really nice. Here's another one mixed in with it. It's called the Miami Mist. And with this picture here, you can see why it's called mist, because of the fringe that surrounds the petals of the flower. And it gives it kind of a misty appearance. There's a real close-up of it. This one of the water leaf plants, the one that blooms in the spring, called woolen breeches. And again, a slight lavender purple color seems to be coming out a lot in these flowers. Here's wild geranium. Now, I don't know how it got the name geranium, probably because the shape of the seed reminds them of the bird, but it doesn't look at all like our commercial geraniums. But here they are, and they're somewhat larger than some of the other flowers. And again, very, very pretty. Pussy toes are nice. One of the plants, and we saw a couple of them earlier, where the male and female flowers appear on different plants. They don't appear on the same plant. I believe that's called Dionysus. But this is the female, and here you have the male. And so when you're looking at them in bloom, it's easy to tell the difference. But it means that you have to have both if you want to have reproduction. Here is one, the golden seal. For a long time, people had to be very, very careful about identifying where they found golden seal, because it has certain medicinal properties. And for a long while, it was a hot item. And people were going out and digging it up in the woods, which is an absolute no-no for any wildflower, unless it's your own personal property or you have permission. But now they seem to be growing them commercially, so the pressure is off. Here's the flower close up, and here you can see what the fruit's going to look like in the fall. And that is the golden seal. Here's the dwarf larkspur. There are several other larkspurs that come into bloom later in the year, but this is the early one. Usually, you can see this one is running different colors. And the ones I see more often than not are this darker purple color. But obviously, they can come in white or a mixture. The larkspur refers to the end here that looks like the spur on the foot of a lark. Here, we're going to turn it over to Anne.
Well, earlier, Bob had mentioned the Monarda or bee balm, and this is the Monarda Bradburyina, the one that blooms earlier in the spring months. And this is in the mint family. And the leaves of this plant were used by the Native Americans to make tea, and also by the early settlers after the Boston Tea Party. This is the shooting star. You can see how this gets its name. Very pretty, distinctive spring wildflower. And here we have the wild hyacinth, which is kind of white to bluish white in color. The flower is on a relatively tall flowering stalk. So this is an easier one to identify. Here's a close-up of the flower and a closer look at the buds as it is coming into bloom. Wood betony is also called Laoswart, and this is kind of an odd plant. You can see the fern-like leaves down there in the lower left. That's something that's kind of distinctive about this plant. It was believed in the Middle Ages that this plant had some connection to lice. Guess that's how it got the name Laoswart. Wood betony sounds better though, right? And this plant does have some parasitic characteristics, so it's a little strange compared to some of the others, but interesting nonetheless. And here we have a photo of the wood betony or lousewort with the red fire pink. The fire pink here, literally growing out of a rock, is a very attractive red flower. And you know who likes that? The hummingbirds when they're coming back north in the spring. And here's a close-up of the flower. And speaking of hummingbirds, another one that they like is the columbine. Aquilegia, the name for this one, translated means eagle, and that refers to the flower spurs, which you can see on this picture. And the spurs are bent at the top, thought to resemble talons of the eagle at their tips. So that's how it got its name. And of course, the red color and these long spurs easily illustrate the association of this plant with hummingbirds. Next, we have the jack-in-the-pulpit, and this is also another distinctive spring wildflower named for someone who thought the appearance of this looked like a preacher in his pulpit. But this plant can have a range of colors from quite dark, as you see in the middle and the left pictures here, to more green colored, like the one on the right. And you'll notice the leaf arrangement on this as well. And it's thought that the plant can adapt its size and its color also in response to environmental conditions. Now, related to the jack-in-the-pulpit is the green dragon. And this has a very unusual flower. You see that in the center of the picture, that skinny thing that looks like an odd finger pointing to the left. That's the flower of the green dragon. And then look up in the upper right-hand corner, and you'll see that the leaf arrangement is quite different than that with the jack-in-the-pulpit. The jack-in-the-pulpit didn't have as many leaves as the green dragon, and the leaves are sort of arranged in a semicircle form, as you can see here. So that's how you can tell these two plants apart. The foliage really helps with that, as well as the strange bloom. But both of these plants have similar fruits, which are these red berries that you will see on the plants later on in the summertime.
Well, we come now to the mayapple, and this is one of the most easily recognizable plants in the spring forest, and that's because the plant itself looks like a little umbrella, and it's frequently referred to as the umbrella plant. A couple of things to note about this plant. You can see in the background that there are some that have a single stalk and some that have a double stalk. Well, it's not till the plant is old enough to have the double stalk that it will flower. And you will notice that the flower is coming from the crotch in the stalk. So if you're seeing them and they don't have the double, I'm locked up again. They don't have the double stalk, they are not going to bloom and they're not going to produce fruit. Well, while I'm stuck here, I can't show you some more pictures, but I can mention a couple of things. They are going to produce an apple, and while it's called a mayapple, they usually bloom in June. Here we go. You can see the formation of the apple, and here is a close-up of it. And that apple will eventually ripen and be a yellow color, and they are edible. In fact, I have been told, though I've never tried them, that they make excellent jam. Problem with them, two things I would mention. One, they are very attractive to animals, particularly turkeys, who will get those things right away. So you have to monitor your patch pretty closely if you're going to harvest them. The other thing that the parts of the plant other than the apple are toxic. They are poisonous and pretty powerfully poisonous. The leaves, the stem, the roots, all of it. In fact, the poison is so powerful that it is actually used to make the medicine that is used to fight cancer. When someone says they're undergoing chemotherapy, this is part of the chemo that they're going to be getting. Here is false garlic, and it's called false garlic because it doesn't smell like garlic. But you'll see it turn up all over the place, and it is a very pretty little flower to see. A lot of times you can see, as in these pictures, there's not a lot of other plants around it, so it likes open area. The wood spurge, the flower on this is so minuscule that you really almost have to have magnification to enjoy it. But the leaves, I think, are a very interesting arrangement. And so I just think this is a really unique and interesting looking plant. Here is the American bladdernut, another shrub or small tree. And of course, they have the bladders in the fall to hold the seeds. Here is a close-up of the tree. Here is wild strawberry. And many of you may have used these as ground cover, for which they work well. The flowers are very pretty. And it's my understanding that the fruit is extremely tasty, though in my observation, it's kind of small. And it's really hard to get because every animal everywhere seems to love these things, and they'll get it in a hurry. Here is the ground plum. It is another plant that produces an edible fruit, the ground plum. The rest of the parts of the plant, again, are toxic. In fact, it will poison grazing animals, and most of them are smart enough to stay away from it. But most farmers would rather not have it in their pastures. Here is the low bush blueberry. Again, they will produce blueberries, and its cousin, the deerberry. And one of the prettiest spring flowers is the azalea. And they are, if you go down to Pickle Springs, down between or east of Farmington on Highway 32, they have a really great display of these in the spring. It requires a more acidic environment, so they don't do well in most of the dolomite and calcium glades that we have, are undersurface that we have around here. Here you can see them. Not only are the flowers very pretty, but they come in some different colors also, usually pink and white. Here, this one looks to me almost a little orange, but they are a really nice flower. This is one of the spiderworts, or Tradescantia. This is the early spring one, sometimes referred to as wild crocus. Here's another view of it. And again, a theme we keep repeating: the same species of plant frequently has different colored flowers. Here is actually a different species. It's a little bit taller. And as you can see, the flowers are a different color also. And here are the dwarf crested iris, early spring blooming iris, and they don't get very tall. There is a really nice display of these on the Wildflower Trail over at the Shaw Nature Reserve. There is a close-up of it, and it has all the basic iris parts. It just doesn't have the goofy colors you get with the hybrid iris that we always see. Okay, we're going to come back to the orchids, and I had mentioned earlier the Adam and Eve orchid and how its leaves stay green all winter, collecting up and storing energy for the spring. And here it is just before it blooms, and then when it does bloom, it sends up this stalk, and you can see the beautiful orchid flowers on it. And here are what the capsules will look like in the fall. I suppose you can collect those and try to plant them, but generally speaking, orchids are notoriously difficult to propagate. Here is another spring orchid of the same ilk. It's the coral root orchid. It sends a branch, a spike with the flowers, and the flowers on this one look a bit more orchidy than I think than the Adam and Eve orchid does. This one has a kind of a strange behavior. We have an area where we've monitored it for 20 years. And once in that 20 years, the coral root orchid came up just on time in the spring and bloomed beautifully and then went away, and we haven't seen it since. So I think if we can hang around another 20 years, we'll see it again. Here is one that really is pretty, the showy orchis. And you can see, I think I have a third picture. There you go. That really is pretty, and I think a lot of people might identify that as an orchid. To be honest with you, I have never seen one of these in the wild. This one I have, the lady slipper orchid. The same species actually comes in two formats, the small one and the large one. The smaller ones apparently are further south, and most of the ones we see around here are the larger ones. Two places I have seen them are Quiver River State Park and out at the Nature Reserve. But this truly, there are a lot of cypripediums in the orchid world, and if you go to the orchid show down at the botanical garden, when they have it, you will see many different varieties of this particular genus. The one thing you won't see will be our native orchid. And here is a close-up of it. And I don't know what to tell you, but that is to me, a really beautiful flower. Cypripedium actually means Venus's shoe. So that's why they get the name lady slipper. And finally, there is another one more close-up of it, and then we're going to call it a day.
Well, folks, the sun is set on our virtual walk through the woods of eastern Missouri during the springtime. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we want to leave you with this quote from the poet Edna St. Vincent Millay that reminds us all that spring is just right around the corner. And if you would like to learn more about these spring wildflowers, we have a few suggestions. There are several good books shown here that would be helpful that we have used in learning more about these plants. And I think we have a list of these on the next slide. The Missouri Wildflowers book has a more updated version than the cover of the one depicted in the previous slide. These other books on this page here may not all currently be in print, but they may be available either online or at your local library. And we did include Native Landscaping for Wildlife and People, written by our very own Dave Tilka. And if you would like to go out in the wild and look for these flowers in their natural habitat, we have a couple of suggestions for you to do that. First of all, the Missouri Native Plant Society, check out their website, and they have a very active Facebook page about different kinds of native plants. And then also the Webster Groves Nature Study Society, or WIGNUS, has a botany group that goes out on weekly field trips. They are now held on Monday mornings, and I know you in the audience do participate in these field trips, and it's a great way to go out and see these plants in their natural habitats and learn more about them. If you want to be notified of where the botany group is going each week, and they go all over the St. Louis area, you can send an email to Wayne and ask to be included in the distribution list. The notification usually comes out a couple of days before the Monday walk, and there is Wayne's email address on there. So these are good ways to actually go out and see these plants and learn more about them besides just reading about them and looking at the pictures.
There is one more way to learn that I have found kind of interesting. It's an app that's available for your iPhone or the other one too. It's called iNaturalist. It's free. And the way it works is you can take a picture of a plant or an animal or just about anything else and ask the app to identify it. And my experience has been that it gets it right about 80% of the time. If you get a good picture and has, for example, flowers in it, you'll almost always get it right. Sometimes it gets lost on the vegetation, but it'll give you a list of maybe 5 or 6 plants that it might be, and you can look them up a little closer and see if they fit. But I would absolutely recommend using that. And so that's another way to go and learn a bit about these plants. Also, I imagine I do know that the Missouri Botanical Gardens has classes in these that generally are going to walk out at Shaw Nature Reserve. I don't know, James, do you still teach any of those? Whoop, I guess he's not there. But we learned a lot in taking those classes from James.
Yes.
And he's excellent if you ever get a chance to go out with him. Okay, that's it. If you have any questions, answer them.
Thank you both. That was a wonderful, warming trip through what to look forward to soon. In the chat, some of the questions were about where to find, and I think you just gave us some tips on, how to find sources, where to go looking. See, it looks like Prem suggested, where am I?
Well, I don't know. Where are you?
Really?
Are you at home or are you out partying someplace?
She said, see, a good place to see Harbinger of Spring is Robertsville Park near Shaw. And then, of course, you all mentioned Shaw and several other popular places, and then the resources that you gave at the end. Somebody, Ina and Brian Ferris, said lots of Virginia bluebells at Bluff View Park in Wildwood. And
well, almost any conservation area or state park is likely to have some that is a good place to walk in the woods, and you will find some wildflowers there. Washington State Park is probably one of the best. St. Francis State Park is also very good. And like I said, many others.
So when can we start? March? Is things be starting to come up in March?
Well, for example, the witch hazel is already in bloom, I'm sure.
Right.
And I don't have a real good to go see that except the botanical garden. But the peak of things will really get going the 1st of April. And so anytime in the month of April through the middle of May, one of the things I remember when we were taking the walks with James Traeger, every week we would go out there, and every week you would see a different bunch of wildflowers, because they are ephemeral, and the ones you saw last week, many of them had already been And then they had the ones for this week, and next week you'd have another new group. So you can find a spot and go every week in April and May, and you will see new and different and wonderful wildflowers every time.
Well, and then I guess, plant sales will be coming up. I guess that's something else that I didn't see any questions about it, but I believe that it's a little harder to find spring ephemerals most of the time at
Yes.
plant sales.
There are a few like the Soledine poppy and the Virginia bluebell that are pretty much available, but things like the Trillium, I think 2 years ago, Shaw Nature Reserve had about a dozen Trilliums for sale at the wildflower sale, but that's about the only time I can remember seeing them on sale. We actually got ours as a gift from Jack Harris. When he moved to Columbia, Missouri, he had to sell his house, and he invited people to come over and harvest his flowers. We also got our bloodroot from him that way. Again, it is illegal, immoral, and fattening to dig up any wildflower on public grounds.
Right.
So you'll have to find a private donor, or as we did, someone who is moving or going to develop the land that will let you dig up the plants if you want to go that route.
Well, and then to the extent that people can, of course, we do as much sharing of native plants at our monthly gatherings starting in April as we can. And then some of the well-known plant sales like at Shaw Nature Reserve. That brings me, and I am going to go ahead and just real quick point out a few things that'll be, coming up as we move forward into the spring, including the Partners for Native Landscaping workshop, which again will be virtual starting March 10th. You can start registering for these presentations. They're all through the county library again this year. But this year, there is also a Partners for Native Landscaping website, and you can go to it and see what all of the presentations are, and then register from there for each individual presentation that you're interested in. It'll take you right to the county library where you can register. So that's long website, Partners for Native Landscaping, all one word, .stlouisaudubon.org. St. Louis Audubon has arranged the website for us and is coordinating for the partners as usual. So Partners for Native Landscaping .stlouisaudubon.org. And what brought me to this is the fact that this year there will be on April 9th a plant sale at the end of it. So with various vendors and also educational tablers. So lots to look forward to there, and that'll be another resource for purchasing plants in April. And then just our garden gatherings will start again in April through October, Wednesdays and Saturdays, members only again this year. We just have such a large membership that we have to keep it restricted, and it's also a perk for membership. Then finally, the tour, St. Louis Native Plant Garden Tour, will happen again this year on June 11th, the traditional Saturday before Father's Day. And this year it's going to be 5 yards in the St. Charles area chapter environment over on the other side of the river, 5 of the yards, and then on this side of the river in Crestwood and Olivet will be the other 5 yards. Should be great. And Time is almost up, and so lots of thanks to both of you. There are a number of thank yous in the chat as well. It was a real pleasure, you guys. Everybody, happy spring. We'll pretend. Happy spring, and we'll see everybody for our March gathering. Well, no, not gathering. Speaker series will be virtual again. And look forward to seeing everybody in person in April. Take care. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you real.